Yo, 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 what's going on? This is the NRW, where nerds rule the world. It's your boy, Kuya P, aka Patrick Michael Strange, and I'm back for another amazing interview. This time talking comics. Y'all know I love to talk comics. That's where I started. And we'll always put it down. And so today I have another amazing comics creator. He has a book called Fight of the Century, which I'm going to be really excited to talk about when we can. But there's a lot of stuff going on with that, and we'll kind of highlight that. But he's been in the game for quite a bit. I've known him for such a long time. He's doing amazing work with PREVIEWSWORLD. He is the founder of Create the Culture. You also know him for the Harvey Award nominated District Comics in Unconventional History of Washington, D.C. Just a great all-around guy. He knows all about comics. He is a friend, and I can't wait to get into this convo as I get to do my thing with him. Because, you know, when I talk with a lot of these people, you know, I don't exactly have a deep connection. It's just kind of like I'm learning all about them at that interview. But this guy, I've known him for a while, so you know, I get to dig in and have fun, and that's always a pleasure. So let me bring him up on the screen. My man, Troy Jeffrey Allen. How are you, sir?
What's up, man? Get my own drum roll.
There you go. I'm gonna throw air horns in there.
There you go.
Right at that moment, you don't know, but in post, I'm gonna put in those air horns.
You put in some air horns. I love it. I'm with it. I'm totally
with it.
Let's go. What's up,
brother?
Patrick,
how are you, man?
I'm good, man. Like it's been a busy summer, but you know what? We're fighting through it, and we're using our own creativity to fight through it. So we're making some shit happen. I
will say, man, there's a beauty to, you know, the social networks and everything like that. You know, because we. You know, sometimes it can be a wasteland, right? And it's like, ugh, you know, people profiling. You only see what they really want you to see. You're not getting the nitty gritty. So like when you talk to some cats, you know, you may not know if there's a problem with you. Cause like when you're talking, hey, are you good? Are you good? But they're not really good. And, you know, it's difficult. But then in other ways, when we can't connect as much as we'd like, you know, especially now we've been in this pandemic, I would say the beauty of social networks, we've been able to still keep tabs and know what's going on with people and hit each other up. So I haven't seen you in forever. I think it was con time because it's con life. That's how we met. But you know, those haven't been exactly. It's been difficult because, you know, that's a wasteland for getting the disease. So, you know, you don't really head out to that. But I've missed you, brother. It's a pleasure that we've at least had the venue of social networking to still connect and then do these Zoom convos, and you blessing with me to have that opportunity to speak on your forum with PREVIEWSWORLD. So thanks, brother. And absolutely. I love that we have that to still keep in touch.
I also want to say you and I probably have the two dopest setups in all of live streaming. I just want to make that clear. That was my mission when I moved into this place. I was like, all right, basement's mine. I'm going to find something to do. So, you know.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, like no, everything's cool, man. Like you know, I'm trying to turn the page. That's the big thing here. I've been PREVIEWSWORLD Troy for quite a while. Okay. Before that, I was small, and I don't think some people don't realize this. Before that, I was small press comics, like indie guy Troy. That's where the District Comic stuff came through.
Word.
You know,
let's start that journey. Let's get to that point, because I like to walk through that time period and show that, you know, not everybody's journey is the same. And also destruct monoliths, which I do a lot with Show Pal Show, because, you know, as Asian Americans, there's a set kind of way. Oh yeah, but we're not all the same. So I'm sure you know, even for yourself and your journey, we've all gone through it. So let's start from that beginning. I like to take it to before going into our own personal stories, giving nods to those that came before, to see if maybe writing and creativity wasn't just Troy bringing it to the table, that it's in the DNA. So tell me a little bit about, you know, moms, pops, grandfathers, aunties, uncles, descendants, a little bit about their story leading into your story, and if creativity was something that is in the DNA.
So, you know, actually, you know, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I will touch on this very, very briefly. I lost my mom this year. And one of the things that I found out about my parents is that my dad wrote. My dad is a writer. You know, you're kind of going through all your family stuff or whatever, like, you know, just trying to do the basics of, like, you know, basic paperwork for wills and, you know, and like just just documenting a human being's existence, right? And yeah, one of the things I found out was that my dad was a writer, and like that was something that he did. And beyond that, it's interesting because my immediate family, the family that I grew up with directly, not very creative, not really a creative hub there, right? But all my cousins have, in some way, shape, or form, kind of zeroed into taking on a creative role. I have a family in Los Angeles who are definitely like, doing music, and my cousins, I mean, doing music and film. And I have cousins who are into makeup, and they're like, trying to start their own line, and poetry and all sorts of stuff. And it's just, one of those things where I guess it just skipped a generation, and we were the next in line to kind of pick this up. So maybe the generation before our parents were probably the creative ones too. I don't know, but yeah, it's somewhere in the DNA. It's there.
Awesome. And before I continue, I just want to again express my deepest condolences and utmost respect to you, brother. I love you, man. I know I don't know my immediate parents yet. I'm thankful and blessed that they're still around, but we've had loss these past recent years. So my most utmost respect and love to you, my friend. Yeah. So again, you came into this world from this amazing woman. Talk to me when you first touched ground growing up. Give me ages 1 through 5 of Troy Jeffrey Allen.
1 through 5, geez. Yeah. So I was born in Washington, D.C. I went to an elementary school called Fort Lincoln in Washington, D.C., which actually does not exist anymore, I don't think. But one of the earliest memories I have actually is we kind of had a publication that the school put out, and for our reading and writing classes or whatever, and I put together this story of Troy in the Lion's Den. I guess it's supposed to, some biblical reference there, and I wasn't really my mom especially was not really like a churchgoer, but for some reason I opted to tell a story that was in line with Daniel in the Lion's Den. And it's funny because it was my first brush with being pissed off at the editor.
Wow.
Yeah, like I wrote a line I remember this very distinctly. It's like the one thing I don't remember anything else about the story, but I remember this very distinctly. The story ended on me waking up from this dream, right, where I fought some lion or whatever, and for some reason cops were involved at the end. I can't remember what it was, but I remember I told a cop to shut up at the end of the story, and the teacher, who basically was editing this school publication, omitted that part and changed the ending. And I remember even at, God, I want to say maybe about 6, I want to say I was, being like, well, that's bullshit. So yeah. And I don't know, besides like recently discovering about my dad's fondness for written words, I don't know where that push came from, and like the only thing I can really pinpoint it to is comic books.
Okay,
like straight up.
So what was that like? So I know for myself, growing up as a Navy brat, moving from place to place. You start out wanting to go outside, right? We all want to play outside, make friends, play with toys, but then you don't make a lot. Well, for me, 4 years here, 4 years there, military brat kid, right? And so then you just find yourself in the house. And so, what are you doing in the house? We didn't have video games like we do now, right?
No.
So I'd go to the exchange or the commissary and I'd find comic books. That's where I discovered comic books and got into that. So that's where creativity would then spurn from that. So I'm assuming, tell me, so DC life, was it how did comic books get into your hands, from staying inside, or was it through meeting other kids outside? Tell me about that.
No, I think, yeah, it's like I always have trouble remembering like the first comic book that like really grabbed me. I do have a distinct memory of 3 particular things. Archie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the fact that I was not enough of a troublemaker in school that my mom refused to get me a video game console. So all 3 of those things factored into me ultimately being like, all right, well, I got to find something else to do, and I just gravitated towards comics. You know what I mean? I remember Archie. I also remember actually there was this Marvel anti-smoking comic with Luke Cage, Spider-Man, and Storm in it that they were giving away to elementary schools.
Wow.
And so that's also an early childhood memory that I have of like that book being given to me. But if I had to pin it on my obsession with comics on anything in particular, it'd probably be the Ninja Turtles.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I was obsessed with Ninja Turtles. Like, it was dumb how obsessed with Ninja Turtles I was. To the point that to this day I have friends who, like, I haven't seen them in years, but like, remember you used to, like, talk about Ninja Turtles all the time, and you had these like fake sais and this fake katana thing, and like, yeah, that was me. I was obsessed with Ninja Turtles.
I love that. Was that the when Archie had the license?
Yeah. Yep. Because truth be told, I didn't even read the Mirage stuff until like years later.
I was about to say, because a lot of people like Turtles. I wonder how deep people are. I think most of us, the majority of us, especially in that time period, it was the Archie stuff. When they started putting out the license of the cartoons, like you had to be a real indie cat and to pick up the Mirage stuff.
The Mirage stuff is like, I mean, that whole thing, from it being just like a spoof of like Daredevil and all things Frank Miller, like all that stuff right over my head. Like I didn't know or care about any of this stuff. Didn't even really think of Marvel that much at the time either, to be real with you. I knew who Spider-Man was, but if you told me he was a Marvel character, I wouldn't have known. But I knew everything about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, Dimension X, Shredder, Raphael, Leonardo, Donatello, Cowboy Bebop, Rocksteady. I was all over that shit, man.
I bring that up because, like, once I got into becoming a Turtle fan like yourself, I was deep with the Archie stuff, but then you learn about the Mirage, and then like, okay, I'm gonna try and go for that as that early collector, right? But then it was impossible to find or super expensive, there wasn't even a comic shop nearby. Conventions wasn't even a thing, so there was no way I'd track down those early Mirage stuff. But I'm happy you brought up that Archie, because you made me remember a little bit beyond just like going to the exchange, living on a military base. It was the barbershop, bro. Remember barbershops would have like comic books that you could check out? And it was mainly Archie and those kind of like titles and stuff.
Well, so here's the funny thing, because I've heard people tell these stories about barbershops that have comics, right?
Yeah.
That was not my experience. And I think it's because by and large, I was a kid that lived in and around the city, right?
Got it. Okay.
I was always within spitting distance of DC, if not in DC as a kid. Yeah. And so I like my comic experience really was going to highs, which there's still a few of them around, but they're basically like, 7-Elevens. Okay. And they would have spinner racks, like straight up spinner racks. And I also kind of really, the Ninja Turtle thing was like late 80s. Okay. And then that never got replaced by Batman, but Batman definitely became a thing shortly thereafter, right? Yeah. And so I started kind of picking up some DC stuff. I actually had A Lonely Place of Dying. I had that as a kid, like the where Robin becomes Nightwing and all that stuff.
I think that's when I jumped on Batman.
Yeah, right. And I think that was right before the movie dropped too, if I remember
89
correctly.
Batman.
Yeah. And I don't know if you remember, but the Batman movies right before 89 Batman, and of course a little bit after, weren't so much gimmicky. They were just dark. Like there were stories about like all like drug addiction and spousal abuse, and like, and that was kind of, spurned from the Dark Knight Returns and going more in that direction. But then they did the story about Tim Drake. Yeah. And him, like, knowing who Batman's identity was. And I picked that stuff up. But I was real fortunate because by that time, like, it's the perfect trifecta, right? So you're looking at maybe like a 4-year span. And in that 4 years, it goes Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, comic book, right? Turns into a movie, cartoon. Batman, movie, turns into a cartoon. Then it was over. The X-Men. That was it. Right. And of course, that turned into a cartoon. Movie came later, but the X-Men was it. And once I got into the X-Men, I got into Marvel. And once I got into Marvel, I got into the larger concept of like straight up like story. Like all that. I was actually joking today. I was on in a Facebook group, and I kind of pointed out to people, I was like, I really fell head first into the lore of Marvel. Like, you know what I mean? Like not just the stuff on the back of the trading cards, because that was a big thing too at the time too, right?
Oh yeah.
But also just like the bullpen and Stan Lee, like, you know, Excelsior, and him talking directly to you as an editor-in-chief, and, you know, who is Tom DeFalco and who is John Byrne. I was all into that stuff, you know.
Hell yeah. Same.
And so I knew the creators' names like I knew the characters, you know what I mean?
Totally. Hell yeah.
And so that was definitely a sea change for me. And like, yeah, if I had to really pinpoint anything, then I like, my understanding of story starts with Marvel. It really does, like straight up. So just an education on storytelling and world building and character, you know.
I love that. We'll get more into that as we get into the school years. But I could fanboy with you on old school comic book stuff. For hours. So we're in the 1 to 5, right? And we're finding comic books. You wrote a story, Troy and the Lion. But what were other things you're into leading into like finally like starting school? But as we get into the elementary school years, what would your parents tell me about a young Troy Jeffrey Allen? Were you staying inside the house? Were you going outside? What were you into? Did you also pick up the TMNT toys? They didn't buy you a console, obviously, as you said. But what were you getting into before you really, you know?
Yeah. I was obsessed with Back to the Future. And it's, you know, and then that period, you know, Back to the Future came out in 1985, and then the sequel didn't come out until 1989. And so that 4-year period seems like a decade, right? When you're that age, when you're 6 years old.
This was a classic.
Yeah, right. Obsessed with Ghostbusters. Like obsessed with Ghostbusters. I recently had to have a come to Jesus moment with Ghostbusters. Like, it's time to let it go, Troy. Like, it's never going to be as good as the first time, you know? Obsessed with Ghostbusters. And, you know, I didn't kind of make this connection until, truthfully, about 13 or 12. But a lot of the movies I loved as a kid were Steven Spielberg movies. Like a lot of the movies. Yeah, like everything from Goonies to Indiana Jones to you know, I hadn't gotten to Jaws yet, but even just the stuff he produced, like Batteries Not Included, Back to the Future, like, you know, just all that stuff. I just ate all that stuff up. Didn't know it was him, mind you, right? But that was the connective tissue. And then years later, I kind of sorted that out, and I was like, oh, that's what that is. And that in itself was also kind of a storytelling influence in itself.
I completely agree. I think as you were talking about like bullpen, which I just absolutely love, because I think that was my gateway, the way how just Marvel had such a family, you know, and you would learn the creators behind the books you love, that made me notice the creators behind everything else that I enjoyed.
Exactly. Right.
Which then, you know, from the film side of things. So I love that.
Yeah. No, the recognition of that, I think that's me in a nutshell. Like, I got to a point with comics where, you know, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I just started paying only attention to the creators, because I was like, well, this person makes good stuff, you know, so I'm just going to follow this person's work. And that's kind of how it's always been. So I feel that. All
right, brother. So, we were talking about other things outside of comic books between 1 to 10. What were you doing?
You know, like I wasn't a very sporty kid. Like, you know, like there was a brief moment of martial arts, where I was kind of obsessed with that, and that was all because of Mr. Miyagi and Daniel-san. Like, I'm not gonna lie. You know, and of course, actually, because also Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So I got into karate for a very brief period, but outside of that, I wasn't really into sports. Like, you know what I mean? Like in middle school, I played basketball. I sucked at it. Like, you know, and you know this, you probably can't tell from looking at the video, but I'm a tall dude. So, you know, sucking at basketball is kind of a sin.
That's why I love breaking down monoliths, right? Like, you know, I thought I'd be a superstar basketball player, but I'm Filipino, I'm short. There is no way. It's not in my DNA as much as I wanted to. And football, that was my passions as a young kid, but it just wasn't in my DNA. And for you being a tall black man, right?
Right, exactly.
Basketball gonna do it, but no, it just wasn't for you.
Just was into it.
It's all good though.
I was much more into those Marvel comics, man.
Hell yeah.
Like, God, honest truth. So I mean, like, that was kind of always the pull. I mean, I really kind of have had to kind of reflect, especially in these last few months, about who I am and where I came from. And one of the things I've noticed is like I've always been interested in stories, like just always been interested in them. It's just something that's always kind of been that's kind of pulled me in. And some of that might be in my DNA for sure, right? Some of that is just what you're exposed to at whatever age, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I just really was way into that. I used to charge like I used to charge it also, I guess, a little bit of a capitalist. I used to charge the neighborhood kids to come to my house and watch movies in my basement. Like, you know what I mean? Like that was the type of thing I was doing. Like,
did you have the cool TV or something, or just?
I mean, not even. Like, I just was charging them to like to watch movies. Like it was, I don't know, which is funny because now I work in marketing, so I guess that all kind of connects too.
That
right?
is awesome.
I'm putting this together as I'm talking to you. That's just interesting.
Yeah.
So
I love it. I love that we can share this together, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a fun ride, right?
Right, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Let's get it. So then we get into school now, right? Mm-hmm. You have certain passions that you know and love. You get into comics. Mm-hmm. You find a love for story. Let's talk about Troy getting his education. Did you enjoy that English class, or were there certain subjects that you kind of took a liking to? Any also like additional activities? Talk to me about learning the world. We know one thing out in the streets, but it's another thing when we get that formal education.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'll be real with you, man. Like, I was not a good student.
Okay.
I was kind of disruptive. I always wanted to be outside. Like that was kind of like I wanted to be anywhere but the classroom.
Okay.
But I did have this very real interest in writing.
Okay.
But look, the education system being what it was at the time, I don't think a lot of teachers really glommed onto that. Like they were just like, well, he's disruptive. And like we have to send him to the principal's office constantly. Like that's the thing that they focused on, right? The behavioral stuff. And in retrospect, it wasn't even until high school that like I finally had a teacher who was like, well, maybe you should do this instead. But yeah, I just was not the best student, which is also probably why karate didn't go the way it was supposed to.
Yeah.
I was a space cadet, man. Like I was just always kind of like, oh, what's this over here? Oh, what's this over here? I just wanted to do whatever I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So and some of that still sticks to this day.
Okay. What would you tell me that young elementary, middle school then Troy wanted to be at that time?
Man, elementary school? God. Yeah,
I wanted to be an archaeologist. I wanted to be Indiana Jones because of the Temple of Doom.
Yeah, that's real. That's real. That's real.
Yeah.
No, much love for Temple of Doom. I still love Temple of Doom. I think I wanted to be a Ghostbuster.
I love it.
At one point.
That too, right? Yeah.
Right. I wanted to be a Ghostbuster. And like, I mean, it's interesting too when I look back at the Ghostbuster movie, because it is a movie about a bunch of small business owners starting a business, right? So in my mind, it was like, that's a job,
yeah.
Right? It's a job that I could have.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a Ghostbuster, and I had a phase where I wanted to draw. Of course, right? You're reading comics, so you start drawing because that's the first thing that anybody who reads a comic thinks. They don't think of the writer, think of the artist, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to be a rapper.
Okay.
That's like 9, 10, 11.
Okay.
That's about 9, 10, or 11, right? But even still, I don't even think it was more like an occupation thing with me. Like It was more of a. I'm trying to, like the way that my brain has always worked really is I want to figure out why things work, which is also something else that I don't think was properly cultivated by schools, back then. Right. But like, I always wanted to get inside the guts of something and see why it is the way that it is. Gotcha. And that was constant. Like it was me whether it was me studying, Jim Lee's pencils or Rob Liefeld's pencils, or if it was me just literally going to my neighbor's house and being like, got any ghosts? You guys have ghosts? That's how this works, right? I come to your house and then I ask you to bust some ghosts and then you pay me for it, right? So that's always how I've been. So I always want to find the mechanics of it and try to figure out how it works. And then, and again, this goes back to the education thing. Yeah. Once I feel like I figured it out, I'm bored with it.
Wow. So, I feel that. Mm-hmm. Dude, I'd take it a step further, like in regards to like the Temple of Doom thing, like Indiana Jones wanting to be an archaeologist, like I would go dive into the library and learn all about the local area and see if I can't. I remember begging my parents for like a metal detector, to find lost treasure. I'd learn about the ways to just encapsulate that ideal that I wanted to be. With ghosts, I literally wanted to be a Ghostbuster as well, and would get in all those supernatural books and everything like that, and and find out and wanting to go visit and check that out. But I take it like that next line. And in regards to writing comic books, I had always wanted to be a comic book creator. I think you and I journey mirror each other. You'd make your own comic books that were with your notebook paper, the lined books, and you make your own take on it. We maybe started out as tracers.
Filthy tracers, right?
Until you'd learn how to, you'd grab, for me, it was How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way by John Buscemme and Stan Lee. That took it to a whole nother level for me.
Actually, I distinctly remember in elementary school, I decided, again, this is me trying to figure out the mechanics of something. I decided that I was going to draw the entire first 4 episodes of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a comic book.
Wow.
Right. That was something I decided. I think I got to like page 4 or 5, but I was determined, man. Like I was going to draw every little detail out and like have this completed story. Like I had duct taped a bunch of construction paper together and like stapled the ends of it as well, and my goal was going to be, I'm going to draw the entire origin story of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, basically, Amazing. So there were just little things here and there like that,
I love that. It's, to me, that stuff, when I find some of those old work, it's golden. It's treasure.
Oh yeah.
It's a great way to reminisce on that.
Somewhere on my Instagram, and this was I think this arrived just in time, actually, around the pandemic. Actually in the middle of the pandemic, the first year of the pandemic, I ended up moving, and I ended up going through some old stuff that I had just kind of laying around. And yeah, man, I found my drawings of the X Brigade. This was my attempt to basically do an X-Men spinoff. It was going to be, they were mutants, and I gave them all names. They were all, of course, rip-offs of whatever Jim Lee and Liefeld and McFarlane and Larson were doing at the time. But I given them little origin stories, drew them in the danger room, just stuff like that was definitely my thing.
I feel it. I love it, man. It's awesome. So before we get into high school and then furthering the progress of your career, I like to talk about representation. As you know, I've been with the Nerds of Color and now with Nerds Rule the World, and I'm a proud Filipino. Tell me about when you found out, when the world makes you realize who you are.
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying? Tell me when you found out that, I am a Black man and I'm here and I'm being made to feel different and being made to feel othered. Tell me about learning that and evolving and how that affected you.
I don't know when that moment actually happened. And the first thing that comes to mind is Rodney King. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And it's just one of those situations where you just can't. I probably was that 1991? So I was like about 10 years old. And there's 2 realities that you experience immediately. And it actually dovetails into me wanting to be a rapper, right? So there's a lot of things happening here at once. So as I'm saying this, I'm like, this is actually probably what it is. The beating of Rodney King by the LAPD was everywhere on the television. And, I'm in a Black community. And so this is very much a moment of concern collectively. Of course, the ramifications of it are over my head, right? Because I'm 10 years old. Simultaneously, though, I'm also listening to a lot of West Coast hip hop that's coming up, right? And so we're kind of post NWA, but now we're getting into the Deep Cover soundtrack, right? We're getting into Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. We're getting into Eazy-E and Dr. Dre beefing with each other, and again, not fully understanding the implications here, right? But that stuff is in my periphery.
Yeah.
And and that's kind of the moment that you realize, oh, I am part of a culture. You don't have the language for it, right? But you start to recognize, oh, okay, this is by extension, this is an extension of my culture, right? And this is my culture's expression, right? And I am part of it. This is something that I belong to. It also helps that, especially in the early 1990s, there was, and I think it's interesting because I was talking to somebody about this recently, how I feel like we lost this. But in the early 1990s, I actually also heard Issa Rae say this, which made me feel less crazy when I thought about this. I heard her say this recently. But growing up in the 90s, particularly the early 90s, there was a lot of Black consciousness roaming around at the time. There was, a different world showing Black kids in HBCUs, right? Mm-hmm. Like I said, you have rappers like definitively saying "fuck the police," right? Mm-hmm. There's an awareness of gang violence, right? There is, of course, the Rodney King verdict, then the subsequent LA riots as well, and just kind of how all these things kind of fit together to inform that this is the reality that you live in.
Yeah.
And on top of that, and I'm starting to kind of also understand that film is not completely, but I'm starting to understand that movies are also a language, It doesn't quite click for a few more years, but I'm starting to understand oh, that's Spike Lee. Yeah. And he's making a movie called Do the Right Thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And the messages aren't really kind of my parents let me watch whatever the fuck they're watching. Right. Yeah. That's just how it was. So, in the background, is Die Hard. Right. But I'm also seeing The Last Boy Scout. And so I'm seeing Damon Wayans as an actor, right? I'm seeing Reginald Vell Johnson as an actor. Urkel's having these socially conscious random episodes every now and then where one of the characters on Family Matters gets called an N-word. What I mean? So all these things are happening, and it's all really in the early 1990s. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it just informs your reality. And I could speculate. I have a few theories on why that shifted and why that changed in terms of pop culture anyway. Yeah. Partially, some of that is because of the death of Tupac and Biggie Smalls. Oh, yeah. I think that that in itself kind of was wait a minute moment culturally for Black people. Mm-hmm. But I think the other thing that happened was September 11th. And I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but we kind of got there was sort of a mentality of it's America against them, So it stops becoming about cultures and subcultures and race, and those conversations kind of start to whittle away a little bit. They're always there, but they start to whittle away. But that early 1990s period was very informative in retrospect,
Completely agree. And I wanted to also bring that in, not only as a nerd of color and being conscious of that, but a lot of that informs my passion for certain content. You had brought up X-Men, and I think both of us know how infamous X-Men is, and just those relatable elements within X-Men where you're different, you're a mutant. And I discovered my early before the X-Men 90s animated that we all love, right? Well, most of us from that time period, right? Mm-hmm. Was when John Byrne and Chris Claremont dropped Giant Size X-Men #1. Mm-hmm. And we had Storm for the first time. We had Sunfire from Japan, Colossus, who I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And then that just opened it up to just, there's not just these white characters, right? There's characters of color that we can see ourselves in. Mm-hmm. And that became my deep cut into just that world and why I just loved X-Men so much more. Oh, yeah. And then here came Milestone, with Dennis Cohen, Christopher Priest, Michael Davis, just all these amazing guys who I adore that they're friends now. And I'm sure you're friends with them as well. It's some of them I am. Let me show respect to Reginald Hudlin, but my man, he was the first guy when I actually got into comics. Oh my God, it's
Dwayne McDuffie.
Dwayne McDuffie, who we lost. Yeah. Who gave us the amazing run on Justice League, just in helping launch, Milestone. But he was the first guy that reviewed my shit. The very first
Dwayne McDuffie. Okay,
nice. Reviewed my shit, took my call as an early creator.
Nice.
It crushed me. I dedicated when that book finally dropped to him, you know, because he just meant so much. Just everybody knows how much he meant to a lot of people. But yeah. So you know, my escape from racist was comic books as well. So that's why I was like, you know, like getting into that and your love for that medium. Was it, I was curious if that was like in regards to if you're experiencing racism, like did you escape into like comic books, or just how did, you know, your ways of dealing with society and everything like that?
So you know what's interesting about that, and it's something I've had to kind of contend with over the last couple of years, especially with these conversations about representation.
Yeah.
You know, I've had to acknowledge that, okay, not all, again, we're not a monolith, right?
Yeah.
No, not all nerds are experiencing these things the same way, right?
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., in the D.C. area is considered Chocolate City, right? For a reason, right? At least it was. Yeah, thank you, beat me to it. It was considered Chocolate City. Right. Now it's something else. But like, it's considered Chocolate City for a reason. That's because it was a very black area. You know what I mean? Like, you go to Georgetown, okay, sure, fine. You go to Bethesda, that's different, right? But that area was very much had a chocolate center to it, right? And so I wasn't really exposed to white people that often. White people were the minorities where I lived. Like, you know, I mean, that's kind of what happened. I remember one year, this is in high school. My school paper wrote an article. Somebody in my school paper wrote an article about how the white kids kind of self-segregated during lunchtime, you know, and that was a whole uproar, like at the time, like, you know, just sort of like calling that out. And they felt targeted, you know. But I think that was kind of their reality. And that's not to say I didn't have white friends, but I never looked at them as, I never saw them as, I definitely saw them as white. Let me be very, very clear about that. But I never saw myself as the minority in that situation, you know. Even, you know, if anything, it was, you know, it's a lot of Latinos in my area, a lot of Black people, a lot of Filipinos actually in this area as well. And that was my reality, you know. But definitely I grew up in an area called Toledo Terrace, and the Bellcrest area near PG Plaza, and that was very Black. It was just very Black. All my mom's friends were Black. Like, you know, every now and then she would have a white coworker or something like that, that she would introduce me to or something like that. But yeah, it was just very much my reality. So it was less about an escape for me, I think. So you know, when people tell me like, X-Men is about race, yeah, absolutely, it is 100%. I totally get that. But when people also tell me about X-Men is just about being different, you know, or feeling like an outcast or a misfit, you know, just being like the weird goth kid or whatever, I also get that too. You know, like I understand that, because that's there's all those elements play into. I mean, all these things can be X-Men all at the same time, you know. But yeah, it was never an escape for me necessarily. It was more just sort of like it was more like a confirmation.
I can see that.
Yeah, that was more like a confirmation. Like, yeah, I mean, even as a kid, just kind of growing up and reading some of those books, you know, stuff like the legacy virus. Like I knew, you know, I was watching MTV at the time, so like I knew the HIV was a thing because that's all they ever talked about on MTV, you know. So I understood the parallels that are going on there, and so a lot of these things were just comics kind of confirming. And confirming these things that were going on around me, and confirming that this was the reality that I lived in. You know what I mean? Like that these conversations are being had on various levels, not just in my neighborhood, not just the ad on the side of the bus depot, not just on MTV, but also, yes, in the comic books as well. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, for me it helped with in different ways. So let's get into high school. So we're learning we're knowing society through, you know, the world outside, through the mediums that we're engulfing and consuming. high school, now where we also have to make a decision going off to college or whatever, and our parents' demands and family demands, society demands. Tell me about high school, and was there any kind of change? You said you were a bad student. Did it finally click, or did it and how did that go?
It clicked, actually. That was actually the interesting thing about it. I recently had to remember who the person was who told me to do this. I think it was a girl named Cheryl Foster. Of course, it was a girl, right? Because it was high school. But I remember she kind of befriended me, right? While we were in my early days of high school. And she kind of told me, hey, I'm in these advanced placement classes and these tag classes. I don't even know if they still do tag anymore. But basic tag meant talented and gifted, right? And she was like, why don't you just take the test and get into these classes? And I did. And I got into the classes. Math not being one of them. I want to point that out every single time. But the reading, the writing, English, history, all that other stuff, yes, I was in. And then immediately my social circle changed. And look, I'm not going to be one of those people that, look, some stereotypes exist for a reason. All right. I'm just going to be honest with you on this. All right. And that's when, look, that's when you meet the Asian kids, right? That's when you meet the Indian kids, right? You meet the kids from Guyana, you meet the kids from Ghana, et cetera, et cetera. Your world kind of slowly starts to expand. Yeah. And that became my network of friends. And those kids were way smarter than I was, 100%. But at the same time, it just informing my reality. And because of that, and because of making that switch, I ended up in a journalism class. And the journalism class we had was very much centered on, we're going to make a school paper and you're going to write these things. And at this point, this is like, let's say 10th and 11th grade, right? Into 12th. At this point, I have decided I want to be a filmmaker.
Wow.
Like that is the thing that I want to do, right? Like that's who I am. Like that's the thing I've decided at the
journalism and filmmaking, though, was there a particular film that like maybe pushed it a little bit? Or
yeah. No. So the thing that pushed it, and this is where you get into my nerdy roots a little bit, right? Was Jurassic Park.
Okay.
Done.
Yeah.
Done. Like my dad said, go see this movie about dinosaurs, right? Like, leave me alone. Go see this movie about dinosaurs, right? I went with my sister. We went to go see Jurassic Park. And like, I just, again, my brain just expanded in that moment. And something in my head, you talked about careers and like, all this other stuff. Something in my head goes, wait a minute, people get paid to make movies? Like, this is their job? And then the other thing that was addictive, and this might sound a little narcissistic, but the other thing that was super addictive about it was that I wasn't just paying attention to the screen. I was paying attention to the reaction in the audience.
Oh yeah.
And that was the cool shit to me. Like this was like, I can make people feel this way, like making things like this. Like, and I mean, it's interesting because I think it never really occurred to me that I knew how movies made me feel.
Yeah.
And I've been to movie theaters before, but something can really be said for seeing Jurassic Park. I mean, that was an event. That was an event. It's funny. I was just listening to on repeat today. Listened to Puff Daddy and the Family's what is it? Notorious B.I.G. song "Victory." Busta Rhymes, Puff Daddy, Notorious B.I.G. Right?
Yeah.
Awesome fucking song, right?
Oh yeah.
And Biggie Smalls in the song says, "Made dough like Jurassic Park did," right? And that's because it was a big deal, And so, yeah, and I know that wasn't just the case for me. I mean, they're still making Jurassic Park movies, you know what I mean? Yeah, it just clicked. It just totally clicked. And I was like, I want to make movies. Now, before that, I had already fallen down that rabbit hole a little bit, but it never really occurred to me that this was something that I could do.
Yeah.
And I say rabbit hole, which is not meant to be a joke, but before that, I had seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a bunch of, there was an ABC special where they talked about how they made that movie. And I watched that special over and over and over. Like, how do you meld the human actors with the cartoon characters? Like, you know, and then they got into the history of Tom and Jerry doing dances with Fred Astaire, and like, you know, how there's a history of this and blah, blah, blah. And that stuff just fascinated me. But it never occurred to me that like, oh, this is a job that you have, you know?
Yeah.
But Jurassic Park, that was it. That was when I think that's when I started to see the ones and zeros, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that just kind of just blew my mind. And so from there, then I was like, who made this? And well, we know what the answer is, right?
Yeah.
Probably the greatest filmmaker of all time, Steven Spielberg. Yeah. And from there, it was just like, wait a minute. This guy's behind Back to the Future and Indiana Jones. You know, mind blown, absolutely mind blown. And that was the shift. And so from there, and this is where it gets really dorky, I started reading about movies. Just anything I could pick up about movies I read. And so my mom started just giving me these review books by Roger Ebert. And she would give me these review books by Leonard Maltin.
Yes.
And I would just and Pauline Kael, and there used to be an effects magazine that used to come out that I don't think comes out anymore.
Okay. I know what you're talking about.
Cinefex, something like that. And and at this point I had kind of figured out that I like to read things. As a matter of fact, the reason I actually got into basketball is because my dad got me a subscription to Kids Sports Illustrated for Kids Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
And you know, I wasn't really interested in any of this stuff, but then I started reading about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, and again, me being me, I want to figure out how things work. And my dad's like, you want to play basketball? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Sucked at it, but that's a whole nother conversation. Right? But yeah, but the same thing here. I just started reading about it all the time, just over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of was like, well, jump to high school, right? Journalism, right? They're like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I'll review movies. I have a lot of opinions about movies. I'll review movies. So that's what I did. I reviewed movies for the newspaper. It's a long way of saying that, but that's what I did.
Wow.
And for the school paper. And this is late 90s. Yeah, late 90s. I graduated in 99. So yeah, this is the late 90s. So it's like, you know, this is that kind of that interesting spot where, you know, now it's like Blade, The Matrix, Phantom Menace. Like we're getting into that groove. And so yeah, that's what I did, and I just reviewed them. And I'm sure some of those reviews are horribly written, like if I look back at them now. But they gave me the opportunity to do that, and so I got into my head that I could write. You know, and I carried that on into college. But and I like after a while, I was probably on the Rotten Tomatoes forums in the early 2000s way too much, just going off on people, you know. But I also was taking film classes, and so that was also the transition of like, okay, how can I do this for real? So yeah, there you go.
I love it, dude. I love that. Mm-hmm. Man, I wanted to just tell you quick, and then I have another question to tie into what you said. For me, and I'm curious if this was the same for you as well, with all your influences that made you want to get into filmmaking. Mm-hmm. What made me want to become a filmmaker was the making of Thriller.
That's a real thing. John Landis. I mean, that's another great
John Landis, seeing Tom Savini making the werewolf mask, everything. Mm-hmm. and then I would say it was Dawn of the Dead. You know,
no, I mean, it's Tom Savini again. Yeah,
Tom Savini, exactly, and the original Dawn of the Dead. You know, and all of that early 80s, because I just noticed I always thought you and I were the same age, but I'm actually I think 4 years older than you or something, because 99, so I'm a little bit ahead, older influences. Mm-hmm. But no, I think that's amazing. But same, Jurassic Park, like you'd watch it once, right, and then the next time you'd watch it, you'd look to your side, especially with certain scenes, right, to see how they would feel,
how they react to it
that were about to happen, just so you could get that. It was amazing, and you wanted personally as a creator to make that feel that you saw with what you would do, right?
Right.
I love that, dude.
Oh, you know, and actually, I you mentioned Michael Jackson, of course. I was a late 80s kid. I mean, I was an 80s kid, period.
Yeah.
And yeah, Michael Jackson, that was another thing. Like, I watched Moonwalker so much. And that also was kind of in its own weird way a film education, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on top of that, it also it convinced me that I wanted to dance. So that was
Oh
also
yeah,
another
right.
thing, right? You know,
I'm
that's like,
Filipino, man. We love
right,
to dance. So
right. You know, so
it was all of that.
you will not see me dance now, but
I love it. So we're getting ready to go off into college, but I wanted to pull back right before we go into college. So you followed the journalism route. You were doing that and, you know, having fun with it. What was your parents like? Because in Filipino households,
mm-hmm.
you know, the arts is okay as a hobby,
right?
But you're not gonna go to school for that. You're either gonna be a lawyer, engineer, doctor, you know, that route. So, what was that decision like when you finally made that decision, or with your parents, and were they cool with that? You know, what was that kind of influence?
You know, truthfully, I think my mom was just relieved that I wanted to be
because you were a bad student prior to
right? Yeah, that I chose a discipline. I think that's what my mom was relieved about. So yeah, and like, you know, my dad, I actually very distinctly remember this was at the peak of, you know, I think I really like movies, you know, period.
Yeah.
Asking my dad, I was like, can I like major in pop culture? Like, is that a thing I can do? And I remember my dad kind of giving some kind of dismissive type of answer, like, whatever. But you definitely can now, you know. But my mom, yeah, I think she was just happy that I had kind of like connected with like some kids, right? That like that actually influenced like my education shift, right? And also that I actually wanted to go to college now, because that wasn't even something I even was considering at any point in time, you know. Awesome. And some of that has to do with environment, et cetera, et cetera. But like, you know, my family, my dad went to college. My dad went to Howard. On my mother's side, and I lived primarily with my mother.
Okay.
My uncle was the only one who went to college, so and graduated, I should say. So yeah, there was just definitely a moment of, okay, well, at least he wants to do something, you know. Yeah.
So let's go into college now, getting that formal education for a career that we hope to have. You know, because, you know, we may major in this, but that isn't what we actually do, right? So tell me about like getting that formal education in regards to, or how that kind of transitioned for you, and what you took from that experience into then now open in the real world after graduating and applying it to what you then do.
Yeah, like, you know, so this is when it all went to shit.
Okay.
So like, you know, didn't come from a rich family, right? And it had been made clear to me at one point in time that I was going to, if I wanted to continue my education, I was going to have to start paying for it. And I kind of looked at that scenario and I was like, why don't I just work, right? So I locked up my broadcast technology degree, got that out of the way. I was like, I'm moving on, right? And then I just started working. You know, and I'd already been doing a work study program through school and all this other stuff. So it wasn't that strange. But my first job while I was in college, actually it wasn't my first job while I was in college, because I worked at the school. But the first job I had outside of the school, actually, that's not even true either. Sorry, I'm just kind of backtracking here.
All good, dude.
Long story short, while I was in college, I started working at the comic book store.
Okay.
I had went to go see Spider-Man.
That was pretty cool though, to like work at a place that was something you love.
Right. Yeah.
In a way.
I want to say it was either X-Men or Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movie or the first X-Men movie that I saw. But I remember walking out of the theater, walking down the street, and I remember there was a Jeppy's Comics World in downtown Silver Spring. And I was going to school at Montgomery College in Tacoma Park. So it was like just one straight line. It was like movie theater, comic shop, Montgomery College, you know? And I decided to pop in, and I don't know what possessed me to go, are you looking to hire somebody? But they were. And I got a job there. And I was there for about 6 years, I want to say, give or take, about 6 years. So from to like about 25, but then I kind of hit a point somewhere around 23, where I started like getting like, I ended up having a job at the Newseum, the News Museum, which doesn't exist anymore, in downtown DC. So I was doing both at the same time.
Okay.
But I stayed at the comic shop. I always stayed at the comic shop, and like I ended up kind of creating an additional network of friends.
Yeah.
And that really became my network of friends after a while, through that shop. And again, this is one of those interesting things where, you know, I got to be real with you, man. Like I can't relate to people when they say like, oh, I went to a comic shop and it was, you know, it's like, you know, it's the white neck beards, like all hanging around. That wasn't our story. And it's about location, right? It really is about location, right?
Completely.
Like the store is now Alliance Comics and Games, which it became while I was working there. But that store is like, you know, it's downtown Silver Spring, which literally is a block away from, you're in DC now, right? And you know, a lot of our clientele were Black, Asian, Latino. Like, you know what I mean? That was our clientele. And so I think I've been almost sheltered in this way from a lot of people, other people's experience. I just never had that, oh, this is a white hobby type of thing, or this is like, you know, for, you know, all these characters are for white dudes. Like, you know, I never really had that experience because everybody I knew who was reading comics were not white. You know, and like a handful of people were, but the majority of them were not, you know. Again, informing my reality. Like, you know, that was just, you know, I maybe I had blinders on to some other stuff that was going on around me. But as far as I was concerned, you know, this particular comic shop was my world. And it stayed that way for about 6 years. Like, you know, I became manager after about a couple of years. Once I graduated from college, the owners basically were like, you want to be manager? And I became manager, you know? And yeah, it just kind of went in that direction for about a handful of years. And then we got to the point, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but then we got to the point where I started to think, well, I could do this shit, you know? Okay. And so, yeah, that was a sea change for sure. Wow. Awesome. That's when I become small press indie comic, Troy.
Got you. I love this. All right. We're going to get in that.
Yeah.
And lead into Previews World and all this amazingness that you come up with. But you graduated, and you're managing this store. I got to ask, you know, the family, you know, their impressions and thoughts on it, you know, because they might have, you know, you figured out what you want to do. You went to school. They didn't think that was going to happen. But then you started working. So was there an expectation, if you will? You know, you finished college, you still going to stay managing the store? Like, was there anything put on you, or really it's just you ruled your own world? You were making your own lane.
Truthfully, I was kind of making my own lane. I'm, you know, again, I'm also the type of person that, like, you can tell me something's not going to work and I just won't listen to you. Like, you know, I'm kind of stubborn that way. But you know, I think that one of the things I did is I went to Montgomery College. I graduated broadcast technology. The goal originally was to transfer to UMBC.
Okay.
And for various reasons, that did not work out. Some of it was finances. Some of it was just me not applying myself, not applying to the school, but me not applying myself correctly to get to that point. Some of it was just I was having too much fun. Like, I'll be real with you, man. Like, I was managing a comic shop. I was hanging out at the local bar, like, you know, with my friends. I was actually really kind of like living this dichotomous life, right? Because it was like nerd by day, but then I also had these friends who were also doing car shows. And so doing like import car shows. I had a buddy who ended up on MTV because in a True Life episode, because he had like he was doing like a lot of street racing stuff at the time. Yeah. And so I was hanging out with those guys a lot of times. I probably don't have to tell you this. A lot of them were Filipino.
No, you didn't.
You know, and then on top of that, we also started doing, and you know, this is a total hustle. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. We also started doing club promotion simultaneously. And I don't know how these things, you know, kind of like all came together, but I also was one of those people that, you know, again, I just wanted to figure out how shit worked.
Oh, yeah.
So if someone came up to me and was like, "Hey, Troy, you want to be a club promoter?" I'm like, "Well, how can I do that?" You know what I mean? And then they'll be like, "Well, we got to like get people basically to come to the club, and then we get paid for it," which is a total scam. I like, especially, I don't know if it's different now, but I really doubt that it is different now.
Yeah.
But it's a total scam. Like, you have the promoters that are actually getting paid by the club, right? And then you have their underlings that are promised a certain percentage that they get paid out, but you never do. At most, you get into the club for free, which is its own cachet.
Yeah.
Like, let's be very clear about that. It's its own cachet in its own way. But it was kind of interesting because, so yeah, I'm at the comic shop during the day, college student during the day, right? And then we go to the clubs at night, and in DC, in the Washington DC area, with the Love, Fur, what was the other ones? All that stuff. Republic Gardens, like all that stuff, DC Live, like all that stuff, right? We go to the clubs at night, and like, my thing is, you know, you can only remove the geek so much from the scenario, right? My thing was, I built the website, right? Now, at the time, everybody had a MySpace, right? And everybody was able to kind of manipulate HTML in some way, shape, or form. And so I just happened to be better at it than my friends around me, you know? And so my job literally was to go on to, not kidding you, Facebook. No, Facebook wasn't around at the time. I mean, Facebook was around at the time, but it was like locked off to like certain college students, right?
Yeah.
So my job at the time was to create a MySpace page, right? And pull in people, invite them to come to these clubs. And that's what I did. Like, I made the MySpace page, it looked better than what other people were doing. And I would say, hey, if you come, total scam again, but an absolute hustle. Like, again, I want to be very clear about this, but you would say, hey, if you come in at this time, I can get you in for this much. You know, if you get on our list at this time, I can get you in for free, you know? And of course, the scam of all scams, if you're a girl and you come in at this time, you can get in for free. Right?
Hell yeah.
And then that's what I did. Like, and then on top of that, we're going to car shows and we're going to Virginia Beach. And I'm not street racing. Like, I want to keep you in mind. I had a Mazda 626. I wasn't doing any of that stuff, right? But my friends,
dude, I had a 626.
Yeah, 626.
Wow. And I know all of this because I had friends doing this as well.
Doing this.
It's crazy how you and I are so mirrored in so many different ways.
That's actually really funny. Yeah.
Wow.
It's just one of those things. Like, I was one of those people that was like, I've always been kind of one of those people that's like, if someone says, hey, you want to try this? And I'd be like, all right, yeah, sure, let's try it. You know, I was in that headspace. You kind of lose that the older you get.
Yeah.
But I'm also circling back to that. And that's what Create the Culture is all about. But I just try anything. Like, why the hell not? Like, you know, and see what the deal is. And that was very much me. Like, I would just kind of find a pocket and I'd be like, oh, let me do this for a little bit. And then I get bored with it and I go do something else. I
love it. All right. When you were not trying to get people to come to your MySpace page off of Black Planet and Asian Avenue. Remember both those? Because that's what my partners were doing.
That's a real
hitting them up off of there, right?
That's a real thing. Actually, I did try to start a Black Planet page. Actually, I just thought about that. Yeah,
I had one, bro. I was on all of them and Asian Avenue. You know, all of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh man, just all the forum boards and all that kind of stuff. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Shit, you just reminded me of the comic joke. All of a sudden I transitioned to the comic thing because that's where I'm trying to transition right now. Is remember Lead Heavy and Pencil Jack?
Why does that sound familiar?
Those are like the original OG. Well, Lead Heavy was fucking Ed McGuinness, Scotty Young. That was like a art crew, but
that was a collective. Yeah,
best forum board for like comic creators to get together and shit. I forgot.
That's right. Yeah,
I don't know that. Ed. And I think Ed and my boy Sanford Green, and I want to say LaShawn was part of it too. And
LaShawn Thomas,
LaShawn Thomas, yeah, that's my homeboy.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, but like those were the best for like up and coming creators to like connect and collaborate.
Yeah.
Back in the day. But but tell me, Indie Troy, so we're managing a store, but where did now writing comic books or making comic books back in the day as a kid, like I want to make comic books now? Like how did that just idea? Well, you said I can do this. You're working at the store, right? And you said I can do this.
Well,
so how did that get going?
So the secret identities that I was running at this all at once ultimately catch up to you, right? And I kind of hit a point, and this is a true story. And my friends will tell you, ask my friends, they definitely remember this story. I was at a club one evening, and definitely been drinking a little bit too much, right? But I was in the club and I saw this guy grab this girl by her hair and basically like dragging her across the dance floor, like yelling at her. Troy grew up on comic books. I'm just going to point that out.
You put the cape on.
I put my cape on.
The Superman cape on.
I did. I was Captain Save-A-Ho for 5 seconds, right? And and also Liquid Courage, all that, right? Went up to the dude. Will Smith slapped him. I'm not going to lie. Like, that's really what it was. Will Smith slapped him. I asked him, what is your problem? Turns out he was a bouncer.
Ooh.
Now, keep in mind, I technically work for the club, but I don't work for the club. You understand what I mean? And so I get yanked out of there by like 3 or 4 bouncers, right? And they're taking me downstairs to the drunk tank, right? God, that's true. I probably shouldn't be telling you the story, but I'm telling you the story anyway. And one of the guys has my arms behind my back, and the other guy, the guy slapped, is just sort of like, oh, just going off. And at some point during the course of this, like him yelling at us and me going down in the elevator, like he goes, what do you think you are, a superhero or something? And I laughed. And that made him even madder, right? So then I realized, oh, wait, these guys might jump me in an alley or something like that, because I just attacked a bouncer and now I'm in an elevator with 2 other bouncers. My arms are behind my back, right? This guy goes, and I responded after I stopped laughing because I realized I probably would just make him madder, right? I go, look, man, all I saw was you grabbing this girl by her hair and like dragging her across the floor. And I felt the other bouncer let go of my arm. All right. And then we got to the bottom floor and the guy the other bouncer told me to get out of here. He's like, just go. Walked out of here. My friends had already rushed to the alley to come get me out of there. Right?
Wow.
And my friends, being smart, because they know that we're at a nightclub in DC in the middle. It's like 2 a.m. This guy's a bouncer. My friend goes, Troy, get in the car. And I'm like, all right, I understand. I'm gonna get in the car. He's like, you stay there and do not get out of that car. I'm like, I understand. And I kind of had this moment where I was like, this shit is not for me. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't too shortly after that, I put Club Troy away, right? And I started going back, I was already still managing the comic shop. And I was at the comic shop, and my buddy, who actually happened to be an employee at the time, Jay, had been working on this wrestling comic. I forgot to talk about wrestling. Oh, God. He was working on this wrestling comic, and he started talking to me about it. And I was sort of like, yo, why don't you just let me write it? And my pitch was this, and this is something I skipped over. My pitch was, I actually trained to be a professional wrestler for 6 months.
When was this? During college?
This was during college.
Okay.
I did it for 6 months. It was super sketchy, and I walked away from it. Again, I'll try it, but if I get bored with it, or if I see something I don't like, I walk away from it, right?
Okay.
And so that was my entire pitch. I was just sort of like, let me do it. I can give you some lived-in experience with this story.
Hell yeah.
So we started making this comic book called Bamn. Now he had the characters, but he didn't have the concept. And my whole idea for Bamn was pro wrestler meets these bunch of wrestling kids who are getting bullied at school and teaches them how to fight the bullies. That was the whole concept. And we started working on it. Me, him, and another friend of ours, another guy who worked at the shop, David Dean, started working on it. And it just so happened that because I had stopped doing the club thing, I started doing comic conventions. Because I don't know, I was just bored. I don't know. I just need to fill that void with something. Yeah. And so I kind of figured out this interesting scam, right? That if you volunteer for a Comic-Con, a comic convention, you get it for free. And so that's exactly what I did. I volunteered for Wizard World. I volunteered for Baltimore Comic Con. I volunteered for something else, and I volunteered for the Small Press Expo in Bethesda, Maryland. The Small Press Expo, I think, is where I got the nugget of an idea of like, wait, I can make a comic, you know? And so I kind of like push for us to take Bamn, turn it into a comic book, and then let's take it to the Small Press Expo and sell it. And so we did. That's what we did. And of course, like, you know, it's a lot of our friends are showing up to buy the book, et cetera, et cetera. But it felt right.
Yeah.
You know, it just felt right. It was just sort of like, oh, okay. Like, all right, I've kind of abandoned these ideas of being a filmmaker to chase girls and party, right? I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But I was like, but this kind of feels like it actually has some intention behind it, you know? And yeah, I just kind of segued out of you know the nightclubs, the DC nightclub scene, into let me just start pushing this comic out there. And you know, the original comic has some rough patches, but then that kind of evolved into, well, I want to do other comic stuff. I don't want to just do Bamn, right? Yeah. And there happened to be a collective of, you were talking about comic collectives, which I guess that was just a thing at the time, right?
Yeah.
There happened to be a collective called the DC Conspiracy, right? Which is a bunch of writers and artists. Yep. Bunch of writers and artists who would just kind of come together and do like these anthology books. And so I was like, hey, I want to do one. I want to do a story. And so at first I did the first story I did was with Jay, and then I did one with David. And then the DC Conspiracy decided that they wanted to start doing newspaper strips. They wanted to publish a quarterly newspaper. And that's how I met Joe Carabeo and Carolyn Belevsky. And Carolyn introduced me to a guy named Matt Rawson, who I still work with today. And he was like, I just want to do some pulpy sci-fi thing. And so we did a pulpy sci-fi comic called Frontiersmen. And then circle back to DC Conspiracy. They started doing this series. They wanted to do a new anthology again, of stories about basically the hidden history of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And it just so happens, working at the comic shop, and Obama had just become president, that working at the comic shop, I knew the guy who designed the inauguration brought badges for President Obama. He was a DC police officer. And he kind of told me this interesting story about how there was sort of this this push and sort of like this underhanded underground network for these badges. Because Obama was, Obama was a big deal. I mean, it still is a big deal, but Obama was a cultural shift, you know? Yeah. And so he designed these inauguration badges for the Metropolitan Police Department for Obama's inauguration. And those things became super valuable. This just this thing that he designed, and they got printed up, and like people were kind of smuggling them, out of the police station, and like making copies and making counterfeit copies. And I told one of the DC Conspiracy editors, like, I want to do this story for District Comics, An Unconventional History of Washington, D.C. And that was a story that got published. And that story ended up in the Washington Post. And it ended up in the city paper as well. And that's when I was just sort of like, oh shit, I could probably do this for real if I really wanted to, you know? Yeah. And yeah, that's been like my track ever since, is like, I'll where there's a will, there's a way, man. Like I'll just find me somebody, or I'll find an artist, I'll pair up with them, and we'll make a story happen. I got tons of stories. You know, some of them are failed film projects. Some of them are just stuff that I'm like, I want to make a comic out of this, you know?
Dude, I'm loving this. I'm loving your origin story right now, brother. Loving this origin story. So that's awesome. And actually that you just answered a question I was going to ask with your last statement, failed film pitches. So like you were a filmmaker, right? That was the goal. But then you found yourself partying, Troy. I can totally relate with that.
Yep, partying too hard.
Discovered Indie Troy, and so now Indie Troy is taking concepts and, you know, creating, and found a collective, the DC Conspiracy, all that. I love how, like, and you know, I know Carolyn and Joe, and they're good friends.
Yeah.
It's crazy how small the world is, and just you know, so yeah. Since you're not creating films, were you taking that into concepts? And you just said you answered that into some of this comic stuff.
Yeah, so, I mean, because it's cheaper to do it in the comics, right?
Yeah,
so,
right. And you can find out what would really work, right, in certain ways.
Absolutely.
So let's bring that into you know, you're working at the store, and then how I think I met you when you were with Previews World. It was when you and I came to meet each other. So talk to me about now getting down with the leaders in comic book distribution. Shout out to the Jeppy fam, and just everything else and the opportunities with that, and then leading into Fight of the Century, which we'll have another conversation completely encapsulated about that. But let's get into this next phase of the career.
You know, I guess it really boils down to you know, I'm starting to think now about career paths, right?
Yeah.
And I actually had a string of jobs. Like I had started doing some small film project stuff on the side, right? But just like here and there. And Joe Carabeo was actually very instrumental in that. He put me onto some stuff that like I probably wouldn't have like gotten on my own. There's actually, there was one thing for actually the Baltimore Police Department that just kind of fell completely apart because of Freddie Gray, the Freddie Gray situation. I was doing that on the side, but I also had my day jobs, right? And so I bounced around a lot, and like I pretty much was like up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, like, you know, and I had kind of already started the newseum, and so I just kind of like jumped to another, and I was in the marketing department, so then I just jumped from museum to museum to museum for about several years. I ended up landing at the National Archives, and then I ended up landing at Ancestry.com. Which is, when you think about it, is kind of a segue in itself. But then I kept getting laid off, you know, and I kind of kept thinking about, there's got to be a way to have like to have a job in comics where I'm not struggling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course, at our work comic shop, I already knew about Diamond Comic Distributors. But then, as far as I knew, they never hired, at least not any job that I wanted. I got to be real with you on that. Like, you know, and, you know, it was always this kind of high turnaround customer jobs, right? Customer service jobs. But finally, a marketing job opened up. And it's actually really funny how things work out. I had a job at the museum in marketing, but also from even as far back as my MySpace club promoting days, I kind of had had these starts and stops, right? Where I was doing social media for people. And of course, this is also happening during the rise of social media as a revenue stream. And that's what they hired me for, social media. They hired me to handle social media. And I got in the door. And it's funny because I think there was the kind of the sniff test, right? Where you come in, and they're like, okay, so what are you reading? And I like, and, you know, I'm sure that I can only imagine that most of the conversations like, oh, well, you know, I read Spider-Man when I was like 12, and I read like Batman when I was 13, and, you know,
they're looking for deep cuts, huh?
Right. And I came in and I'm like, oh, I just read Django Zorro from Dynamite. That was great. You know, and I'm also reading, you know, this. I'm talking about, you know, I'm sitting there talking about Mark Miller and Warren Ellis and Grant Morrison, and like, you know, I'm doing that, right? I'm going that direction, and you know, they're just like, okay, yeah, like he understands this culture at the very least. And I worked at a comic shop, which is also another thing. I understood the language, you know, and it's really interesting because you think these things are random, but somewhere in there's some sort of logic that just kind of brewed to the top that allowed me to do this. You know, I shifted from social media to consumer marketing to consumer marketing manager, and ultimately that also resulted in me becoming a producer and host. So this, again, all these things kind of like, it's like I'm a master of none. Yeah, like, you know what I mean? But at the same time, all these small things that I've been doing for like these last several years allowed me to be this person, you know, for this company. And so, like, yeah, the filmmaking degree, you know, that kind of stopped and started, the social media stuff that I did for MySpace and Action A Go Go, which is another website I did where I just covered action movies like all the time, and a bunch of other comic book sites that I've been just writing about comic books for. In addition to just actually having, you know, just legitimate jobs, like, you know, like at least in terms of as far as LinkedIn is concerned, right? Like for companies that, like, you know, that people are aware of, like Ancestry or like National Geographic and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I just was able to get my foot in the door, and yeah, that's the long and short of it, really. You know, it's happy accidents that kind of created this weird career that I've had.
I love that. I love that. I think everybody that's watching this and can relate to that, and how just, you know, whatever course we're charting through this weird thing called life, you know, that there is some kind of sense to it, or there is nonsense to it, but in a strange way, it will all fit.
It makes you you.
Yeah. It's beautiful, man. It's all about the journey, right? You know,
it's all about the journey.
The best parts of comic books, really, you know, sometimes the finale doesn't always, that, you know, say it's a 12-issue run, right? And when we get to the 11, 12, that finale isn't always there, but that journey from issue 3 to that 9, that's the best part, you know, just getting to that point.
That's the best part.
Were you there when Josh was starting off Comic Wow, or did you come after Comic Wow?
No, I was there when the Comic Wow had kind of already been brewing, but I definitely was already in the company while it was brewing, and I became aware of it. And you know, I'll be real with you. The way that my personality is set up, I'm like I told you, I can be stubborn, right? So the way my personality is set up, if you tell me, hey, we're trying to do video stuff, it's not just going to be, and do you want to be a part of it? It's not just going to be, oh, well, Troy will come in and he'll do like this little bit here. It's like, no. I have a vision.
Yeah.
And I can merit with your vision, but this is what I'm seeing in my head, and we're going to make this work, you know?
Yeah.
And that's,
because it seemed like you really exploded from being the outsider and knowing the family and knowing the whole makeup, and, you know, because we had mutuals, and you were in a different facet. Like, I really didn't see you until like the Previews World stuff started kicking off, but it was more so because I remember with Josh, because I almost got brought into that fold with Richard, Ankney, and Josh with the Comic Wow. And I was just curious how that was, because we talked, but we didn't exactly follow through. At least I didn't follow through all the way with that, because different visions in different ways. But but no, I was just slightly curious, but I could see though why you've been amazing with it. And now hearing your story and your career, you've got natural charisma, brother. And I mean, you've got that lived experience that can make people relate, and you know, go a long way.
People call it charisma. I think it's just not knowing any better. You know?
And you have that self-deprecation part, which is what you have to have.
I mean, I really think that's what it is. Like, you know, it's interesting. During the pandemic, I was watching the movies that made us, and the toys that made us, right?
Yes.
And, you know, it's interesting because I consider myself, like, you know, you tell me you're going to do a short mini documentary about Coming to America.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I already know everything about Coming to America, whatever. But, or Ghostbusters, for example, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sitting there, and I think for the first time ever, I'm listening to these stories, and certain things are coming out that you don't hear, because ultimately you have to realize the stuff we're told about these movies when they're coming out is kind of like the manufactured publicity version of it, right?
Yep.
But in reality, all happy accidents.
Yeah.
You know, like someone has a vision and someone's trying to steer it, but a lot of surprises happen during the course of that, you know, and, you know, it's one of those things where you want Eddie Murphy, but you get Ernie Hudson. But you know what? It would have been a different movie if Eddie Murphy was in it.
Real talk.
And that's kind of, I think, the reality of what I've experienced too. It's just sort of like, again, happy accidents, man. I can't take credit for this stuff. It just,
dude. You know? Well, it's been a fun ride, and this has been a fun conversation, brother. And I hope
good.
You've enjoyed it. I'm like looking at time. We've been talking for over an hour and a half.
Oh shit! Okay,
it's crazy. Oh no, but it didn't feel that at all. And right, I hope you enjoyed this ride. And I hope the audience who's gonna watch this enjoys your story. And I can't wait to talk with you more. We'll have that follow up with Fight of the Century, and hopefully future projects down the line, man.
Yes. I'm hoping like we can just start crushing shit. Like that's my goal.
Yeah, brother. Yeah. I'm with you. Last question. So to close it out, I like to end it with a nerd question, which this has all been nerd stuff. So it's kind of a weird that this is a nerd question, but it's like, if you were to give a nerd TED style talk on any particular subject, what would it be? And it can't be on anything we discussed this whole past hour and a half. So it has to be something that the people don't know. What can we tell the people that you're really, hip on right now that not too many people know that you could go deep on, you could give a TED talk on?
Oof, man. Well, we didn't really talk about this, but it's, culture is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Culture is everything. And a lot of my pitches to Diamond and like just some of the other stuff I've done has been about culture, like straight up. And that has a lot to do with my upbringing, as a Black American, but also being exposed to those high school kids, from like, Honduras and Guyana and like, Cote d'Ivoire and like, there's also that aspect of it too. And the Philippines, right? Got to shout out the Philippines in here, right? And the street racing, that's its own culture, and the comic book industry, that's its own culture. Even like the genealogy stuff with Ancestry and National Archive, that's its own culture, and if I feel like if you're looking for a proper avenue for representation, maybe representation isn't enough. Maybe that's not the answer. Maybe culture is the answer. And I say that because culture is intriguing. Culture is inviting. Culture has a story, right? And everybody loves stories, right? And, culture is everything. And culture is inviting. And the minute that you're able to understand that makes a world of difference.
Okay.
Like that changes your viewpoint. Like the minute you stop assuming that it should come to you and you go to it and humble yourself to culture, that makes a difference.
Interesting. A different way to package that in a way to reach. Interesting. I think I could go that's deep there, because I'm thinking in different ways, because we're having a rough time. Well, keeping it 100 honest, we preach as people of color representation, which is very important to us. I know it's very important to me, but then we have white people, let's be brutally honest, that have a problem with that. But maybe the way to help them digest it would be approaching it from a cultural standpoint in a way.
Yeah. Well, and I think
just taking it a different approach to it.
No, I think that's real. I think that's exactly it. Like, I think that, we get lost in these buzzwords, right? And actually, and you know what? I'll give you a perfect, how I came to this, right?
Okay.
Because representation, right? The minute representation became something that corporations could latch onto, they ruin it. You know what I mean? It becomes something else. You know what I mean? It becomes Miley Cyrus handing someone a Pepsi during a police ride. Not Miley Cyrus. What's her name?
Yeah, I know you're talking about Kylie Jenner or something like
Kylie Jenner. Right.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes this parody of itself, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what corporations do. They commodify and they take it and they turn it into something digestible, right? But here's the thing about culture. Culture's already digestible. You know, it's just a matter of opening yourself to it.
I feel that, brother.
That's it.
I feel that.
Yeah.
You know what? Because we have to think of different ways. I just feel it's terrible that we always have to cater or adjust in different ways to reach, you know. But then, but you're right. You're completely right in regards to institutions kind of taking over representation,
right?
You know? We can go even longer on that one.
Oh, dude. We could.
You just hit me in the head with that one.
Sorry, my bad. These are things I think about. But you know what? I mean, part of the fight of the century conversation can also be the create the culture conversation, because that's where that's coming from.
Let's go.
And it's something I've been sitting with.
Well, I can't wait to have that, brother. And I'm so excited for you. I can't wait to continue giving you love and light as you build these other projects. And I'm going to be with you, man. So for those that might be driving, you know, and listening to this, because we have those cats too. You know, we do live in the DC metro area. So we have a lot of commuters. I will have the links in description below for all of Troy's links. But
thank you, sir.
Listen to this right now. And you can remember, what are some of the links that people can check you out on, brother?
You know, right now, just go to rexco-comics.com. Just like with MySpace, I put a lot of work in it. And I pimped it out, and you can find all the stuff that I am working on, as well as like co-owner, co-creator Nick Allen is working on. No relation. We're trying to create a bullpen environment. We're trying to make it clear that, like, you know, we're the squad.
Yeah,
and we've got something for your ass. So,
hey, well, let me know. You know, I'm down with the Olympia squad, but I'm down to get down with other squads. Holla at your boy.
Both can exist at the same time. It's quite all right.
All right, man. Much love, brother. Really enjoy this conversation. Please check out my man Troy Jeffrey Allen. Again, I'll have his links in the description below. I am Kuya P. This is Nerds Rule the World. We'll see y'all next time with Fight of the Century and Troy Jeffrey Allen.
See you guys. Catch you.
All right, there we go, brother. There's a